So in this video, we're going to look at how as trainer assessors we can manage candidates that are on a course and then how to pass, fail or defer them at the end of the course, as well as record any feedback or a little bit of course information on the candidate's profile. What we'll also do then is we'll have a look at that from the candidate's perspective so you can see how that looks from the candidate side of things. So for any courses, the first thing that we need to do is go into menus and course authorization here. Once we've created a course, we'll see that they appear here. On this, we've got two options on the right hand side. We can either edit a course or we can cancel the course. So if we go into edit, press the blue button, we could see if any candidates were booked onto the course, they'd appear here. If we go into the course information, then we can see that this area is actually greyed out, so we can't change any of the details in here. If anything does need to be changed in here, if it's just a minor thing, then you can get in touch with Mary. It's really handy if you can give her that course number. It just makes it a lot easier for her to find this particular course. And then, so say for example, the booking date. So the booking date is actually the booking deadline that candidates can go up to before the course disappears off events and courses here. So we can change that for you. If it's maybe a change of address or something minor, then that's not a problem to amend. But if it's a really significant amendment that you need to make, then the best route really is to cancel the course and then put a fresh course on so that you can update the information accordingly. So now we can see that we've got a candidate that's booked onto the course. We can see their first name and their surname. We can see that they've met the prerequisites they booked on. And we can also see that they've got a payment ID. So this tells us that the candidate has booked on through events and courses. So when a candidate books onto a course through the events and courses, they also get an email like this one. You can see that the email goes to the candidate, but it also goes to the trainer assessor who's put the course on. And it includes this generic course description information for whatever course that happens to be. In addition, the candidate also gets a receipt, even if the course had no cost associated to it. Now, as trainer assessors, we can also manually add candidates to a course. So to do that, we click on the Add Member button here. So if we're going to manually add a candidate, we do need to get their ME number, their first name and last name as it's been entered into the system, as well as their date of birth. And then we click Save to manually add them. Now, if we've got that information correct, then they'll get added to our course. In this instance, we can see that they've not met the prerequisites. Now, if they tried to book on the course through events and courses, they wouldn't have been able to. But as trainer assessors, we can add candidates to a course even if their prerequisites are not met. So we do need to get this addressed before we process the candidate, because at the end of the course, even if we pass that particular candidate, the credential will not get allocated to them unless we've resolved that failure of their prerequisites. The other thing to note is that we haven't got a payment ID that gives us an indication that that candidate was added manually. If we double click on the candidate, we don't get their email address, whereas the candidate that's booked on through the system, we do have access to their email address. Now that shouldn't be an issue for us because any candidate that's booked on us direct, we should have their contact details, so we don't need them. So if a candidate fails, and in this instance, we're saying it's a Mind Leader core skills assessment, so it's likely that they've either not attended a Mind Leader training course or that the credential for that course hasn't been added to the system for whatever reason. They need to get that addressed directly with Mary, as only Mary or the training administrator can manually override this failed prerequisite. And unless that's resolved, as we're saying, before the course is completed, then the credential won't be added to the candidate's profile properly. So the best thing to do as a trainer assessor is to get in touch with that candidate, try and figure out what prerequisites haven't been met, get that resolved before the course is actually completed. So now we can see that this candidate's had their prerequisites manually checked, so we can continue to process them at the end of the course. So if we double click on a candidate's name, we get this window appear, and what we've got is a series of buttons that run down the left hand side here. We've got passed and failed as the two outcomes available for us. We haven't got a defer outcome, but we have got a mechanism to deal with that. And then we've got saved and cancelled. As we scroll down here on these buttons, the first button gives us some guidance notes about how to complete the feedback forms. The third button gives us a feedback form for an update workshop. Now there's a couple of different boxes here. We've got a series of boxes down the bottom here, as we expect candidates to attend multiple update workshops over their time with us as an award holder. We're limited to 1,000 characters. That's 1,000 characters, not words, for each of these boxes. So we need to be reasonably concise in the feedback that we provide, or the course descriptions that we provide in these boxes. Now, to put that into context, 1,000 characters, probably about 10, maybe 12 lines of text in a Word document, so it should be sufficient. This top box we need to be mindful of, because anything that we add in this top box will be added to a candidate's certificate once they've completed the course. And the idea of this is that if you identified some shortcomings in a candidate during the update workshop, or if a candidate presented with a logbook that didn't really meet the requirements to have a particularly complex site on their list, then you might remove that site from their list and ask them to address certain things, such as go and explore that cave or mine system for 2 or 3 times before having that site added to their list again. The next box provides the narrative really for a candidate making their way through the scheme. So we can see that we've got boxes available for all the various stages, as well as another box down the bottom here. So you could use this, for example, if you were adding sites to a candidate's list and you wanted to make notes of that. So for this course, it was a Mine Leader Core Skills Assessment. And in here, we can actually just cut and paste if we've already prepared statements. So we could prepare that in Word or another word processor. And on a Mac, it's Command and C to copy, and then Command and V to paste that into place. On a PC, it's Control and C to copy and Control and V to paste that. What we're going to ask for feedback is that you make sure that you're filling out the right box for starters. You can see that there's multiple boxes down the side here. Some may remain empty if candidates have progressed through the scheme prior to Go membership going live. We ask that you put any comments about the course, what happened, where you went to, the venues that you used, any particulars of the day, so for example the weather or ground conditions if they were pertinent, a little overview of what happened, any strengths and weaknesses of a candidate if that's appropriate, and then any action plans as well for a candidate if that's appropriate. And then the last thing that we're asking is if you do include your name and the date that the course took place. And that's because this is the area that other trainer assessors are able to see, and it's useful for them to be able to just follow through a narrative of how a candidate has progressed through things. The next buttons on the side here, this is all the different regions. So if you wanted to add a cave or a mine system to a candidate's list, you can do that by just ticking the boxes here. If you can see that a site isn't listed here, what we ask is that you go to your ALO and make a request for your ALO to add that site to your regions list. And the reason for doing that is to try and make sure that we're pretty consistent across the naming of sites, and that there's some sort of process that goes in place before additional sites are added to these lists. We can see we've got the various regions down the left hand side here. So if this was an assessment course, we'd tick these boxes and then these venues would be added to a candidate certificate. Now, once the course is complete, we've got 2 options down the bottom here. We can either click Passed, at which point the credential is added to the candidate's profile, or we can hit Failed. In both cases, an email would be sent to the candidate highlighting their outcome. We've got another 2 options on the right-hand side here. We could click Saved if we want, or we could hit Cancelled. Now, if we hit Save, any information that we've entered into this section of the system will be allocated to that candidate's profile straight away, even if we haven't passed or failed them. So in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to pass them. And we can see now that the status of the candidate has changed to passed. So if a candidate passes the credential, this email will be sent to them, and you can see it includes a copy of the note that you've added to their profile, as well as directing them towards some feedback forms if you haven't provided them with one already. Now, if we double click on that candidate again, we can see that the passed and failed options are no longer available to us. So if we have failed a candidate or passed a candidate incorrectly, get in touch with Mary, our training administrator, as quickly as possible, and she can resolve that for you. So in this instance, we're going to defer the candidate. So when we double click on their name and we look down the bottom here, we can see that we've only got the two options of passed and failed. So passed means that the credential is allocated to a candidate. Failed, nothing is allocated to the candidate. So we've a couple of options really, depending on the outcome of the assessment. So if a candidate is being deferred on a theoretical area, so something like the geology or maybe an understanding of the mine environment, then it might be appropriate that we give a candidate a written paper and then a deadline to produce that or get that paper back to you. So it'd be really useful if you could enter some information on the system here that that's what you've done, and then click the Save button. So we'll leave the course open then until that written paper comes back or the deadline expires. At which point, if you double click on the candidate's name again, and if the deadline has passed, then you can hit the Failed button. But if that's been resolved, then you can change the content of this field and correct it accordingly. If, however, the candidate needs to be reassessed on a practical element of the syllabus, then it'll be worth popping Deferred in here, coming back to the guidance notes, and that'll give you access to download a Deferred or Failed form. So here's a copy of the Deferred Fail form, and basically on the first page we've got some guidelines on how we'd like these to be filled out, and then on the second page we've got the opportunity to record the outcome, so whether it was defer or a fail, the particulars of the course, the areas of the syllabus that were addressed satisfactorily, so what worked well during the assessment. And this is really quite important. If the candidate chooses to be assessed by a different trainer assessor, then that trainer assessor is going to want to be confident that the candidate has actually proven themselves in areas of the syllabus that they might not get reassessed. The next box, we ask that you just outline the areas of the syllabus that didn't go quite so well for the candidate, as well as then draw up an action plan in the next box on how that candidate may address those shortcomings. What we'd ask is that you include some sort of time frame for the candidate to get that sorted. The maximum amount of time that we're allowed for this deferral to stay in place is 12 months from the date of the actual assessment. And then in the last box, how you'd suggest the candidate is reassessed, so whether that might be a surface day or an underground day. Once that form's been completed, what we ask is that you send that to Mary, the training administrator, and then she'll add that to the candidate's profile, either as a deferred, or if it was a fail, then as a failed outcome. And that'll get added as a credential on the candidate's profile, which will enable them to access this document that'll be saved as a PDF. So once you've sent that form off, then the next stage is going to be to fail the candidate to make sure that that credential is not added to them. Once the course is complete, if you hit the next button and then submit and finish, that'll close the course off. Once the course is closed, you can no longer change any of the information in that course. So now what we'll do is we'll go and have a look at how this appears on the candidate's profile. So if a candidate has been deferred, they'll find the deferral credential has been added to their profile. Now this area of the site is actually pretty confidential to a candidate, so nobody else can see these credentials. So if a candidate goes in and clicks on that credential, then this extra window appears and it gives them the option to download this attached document. So this is the failed deferred form that the trainer and administrator will have added to their profile. And the idea of this is that they can download that themselves and then pass it on to whoever they choose to book for that reassessment. And the thinking being is that the second trainer assessor would go in, review the action plan, make sure that those areas have been addressed before they proceed and follow through with that reassessment.